Good evening. Welcome. My name is Simon Jacobson. It's my signature opening, introducing myself. I welcome you all. Those that have been here before, those that have not been here before, and hopefully we can mutually go on a meaningful spiritual journey, as I've been trying to do for many years now this Wednesday night, and above all to empower us all to continue the journey, not just for the hour or 2 hours we're here together, but to see our lives in a new light, because often we get so consumed with the daily grind and all the pressures and demands, expectations of the marketplace and of our lives and our families and responsibilities, that we can lose sight of the journey, because life is a journey. And if you look into the Torah, you'll see the essence of the entire Torah is all about a journey. From the beginning of the Bible through the conclusion of it, the 5 books of the Torah, is all about a journey. First you have the journey of God creating a universe. And I use that word journey intentionally because when you look in the beginning of the Torah in the Bible, when it talks about Shabbos, Shabbat, the way it's described is like in a journey context, that God created the heaven and earth and all its creatures for 6 days, and on the 7th day, Vayechul HaShamayim, we usually translate as God rested. But the truth is, the real meaning of it, Vayechulu, means, as we say in the Kiddush on Friday night, it really means that God returned to his natural place, which really means that the creation of existence, material existence, is a journey outward, and then God returned back inward where he began. And we replicate the process every week. As I just said, we get caught up in the material world. And on Shabbat, the objective is not just don't do this, don't do that, or to eat certain foods or say certain prayers, but it's a journey back to your essence. And then there's the journey of Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, and then their expulsion from paradise. And there's the journey of Noah on the ark. And of course there's the journey Lech Lecha of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Vayetze Yaakov mi Beersheva, journey after journey. And even when he finally settles down in the Promised Land, the Bible continues how one more journey has to be taken. And Jacob and 70 souls have to go down to Egypt, where they end up spending 210 years in a very oppressive exile. And then begins yet another journey, Exodus, a journey that would then essentially encompass the rest of the Torah story from the beginning of Exodus all the way till the end of the Bible is all one journey of 40 years, 42-step journey of the 40-year trek through the wilderness. So you could basically say almost 95% of the Torah of the Bible is about a journey. And it doesn't even end in a way where they actually enter the Promised Land. It ends, the Torah, the 5 books ends, before the book of Joshua, with them stuck on the east bank of the river Jordan and not yet entering the land. Moses dies there, as does the entire generation, except for Joshua and Caleb. So the Torah really remains all part of the journey. It comes to the last step, but they didn't really enter the Promised Land. There's a big lesson in that our life too is a journey. And some even say the destination is the journey. But sometimes we can lose sight of the journey because we get caught up in the moment. And the meaning of a journey is that it's an ongoing sequence. If you were able to have the presence of mind and constantly know, at best times and worst times in your life, that it's a journey, it would make everything easier. Because imagine knowing even in the most painful moments that it's just one step in the way and you will soon be out of this place. The problem is we get so consumed by the pain or the oppression or the loneliness that we lose sight of tomorrow and we lose sight of the bigger picture. And the same thing in our joys. It's all a process. both in our own individual lives and also the fact that we are the children of our parents. So we don't come in a vacuum. We're part of one marathon of history that began thousands of years ago, and we are one leg in the journey, which itself is also very empowering because we're like midgets that stand on the shoulders of giants. So we are now in the 3rd chapter of the 5th book of the Torah, which is really the 5th book. The entire book is actually Moses recounting and reviewing all that had happened during these 40 years from the time they had left Egypt. And many, many elements that Moses reviews before he passes away. Because just for the record, the entire 5th book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, or Dvarim, takes place in a period of 37 days. It begins Rosh Chodesh Shvat and it concludes on the 7th of Adar when Moses passes away. That's the end of the book. So these 37 days where Moses reviews with the Jewish people, the last 37 days of Moses' life, you can call it, where he reviews everything that transpired in order to, in a sense, leave them the last will and testament, his legacy. And of course, it wasn't just for the Jews of his generation, it's for people for all generations. So there are many lessons to be learned from the words of Moses. And actually, many things that he repeats you may have read earlier, but they're details, not just nuances, but details, and many important details that were not mentioned earlier, that we discover as Moses reviews it. Some things are, like in this week's chapter especially, Moses reviews his going up on the mountain, the golden calf, the breaking of the tablets, the second tablets. Last week, for instance, Moses reviewed the 10 Commandments. And though they are exactly like the first 10 Commandments, but there are some changes. And those changes teach us many lessons. So I'm going to focus on today, tonight's class, is one verse, particular verse, just to show you how one verse, just a few words, can literally change a person's life. And this is Moses speaking. As I said, he's leaving his last messages in the last days of his life. So you can imagine a shepherd, a true leader, if you really study and examine his words, it carries a lot of weight. We're talking about a Moses here. So every word that he uttered had many, many, many lessons that are, as I said, lessons to us today as well. Because as we'll read it, you'll see that Moses was a leader not just for them, but for all generations. The Talmud actually says that Ma lahalan hu emedim mishamish, avkanu emedim mishamish. Meaning, just as then Moses served as a leader, so too today he remains a leader. Not in a physical sense, it's through his words. Remember, the Bible is the biggest best-selling book in history and continues to remain so. So Moses continues to speak to us. The problem is that many of us are unable to decipher the words and find their personal relevance, which is what I attempt to do here at this coming together, this get-together here, this class. So we're going to focus on one verse particularly. It's a very famous verse, actually. People have repeated it, but I don't know if it's really fully appreciated, and especially in its message and relevance to our lives today, not just in a general sense. But before I read the verse, let's just pose a few questions. If you've read the email, we send out an email every Wednesday morning or early afternoon reminding people about the class. I also describe what the class will be about. And I don't know if all of you received that. If you don't receive it, just let us know. I'll be happy to send it to you. So it's also a good way to, if there's any changes in schedules, etc., or just to give you a heads up about the class. So you can determine beforehand if you want to come or you don't want to come. If it's a topic that doesn't interest you, for example. You can stay home and try it on the internet. You can see. But bottom line is, what I wrote there was a short type of teaser, so to speak, describing this tonight's discussion, that sometimes the most obvious and simplest of questions we don't really ask. We take it for granted. For example, one of the most basic things that we all do is we all eat, right? We all drink. The human body needs fuel. It's called food and drink. And we do this on an ongoing basis. And the body needs its fuel. And we derive that fuel from different foods. Foods turn into energy. Different foods have different nutrients and vitamins and minerals and so on that break down in our digestive system and turn into our blood. And it feeds us and fuels us, like gasoline in an automobile. And that's a given. There's no human being on earth that does not need to eat or drink. Actually, in the Talmud, there's entire discussions how long a person can go without eating or drinking. It's relevant to certain laws and certain rules. If a person, for instance, let's say, on a legal level, takes a vow that I will not eat for a certain amount of time, if it's something that's out of the range of human capacity, that vow has no meaning. It's a frivolous, meaningless vow. So a person, for example, says, I will go 7 days without eating, it's considered to be a vow that has no validity, because it's impossible. And you don't accept a vow of a person who's ready to commit suicide. And the Talmud designates that a person needs to go 3 days, a person is the capacity for a person to go without food, and 7 days without drink. But without going into the technicalities of it, the fact is we all need to eat and drink. And we don't really question it much because it's just part of nature. Just like we don't question why the sun rises in the morning and why we need heat and warmth and thousands of other things that we just take for granted. But the Torah does ask these questions because you see, in science or the way we've been trained, there's certain things that are just given. We may want to understand what happens when we eat and how food does nourish us and how certain foods are healthier than others. But the question, why do we eat? Why are we created in a way that we need to be dependent on food is not a question that is really asked in a science. It's not a scientific question. But in a metaphysical sense of the word, when you talk about a God that created us, it's a very legitimate question. Because God created us in a way that we don't need to. Why should we have to consume other species, whether it's mineral, vegetable, animal, for us to live? We know there are creatures, there are cells that are self-sustaining. They feed off themselves. They have a way to just feed. They don't need to consume another species for them to survive. So why would God create it that way? And the truth is, this is not just a question about food. It's really a question about, in general, all our needs and dependencies. What is the significance of our material involvements and interactions? Why is it so important, and why are we wired this way? So on a very basic level, you can answer is because in a way that causes us to interact with the universe around us. We are dependent on each other, and there's a symbiotic relationship in nature where, just like, for instance, the scientific process of photosynthesis, which is the process of how oxygen is released into the air, and it's the whole process of how vegetation, how it absorbs, what it releases, and how it eliminates carbon dioxide and produces healthy oxygen. It's a whole process. So nature itself, and the human being is not an exception, is part of a cycle. And we all feed off each other, and we all feed each other. So in the complex structure, the ecological structure of the universe, we are all dependent on each other. You eliminate one element, all the other elements can fail. So human beings are also part of this process. But it goes a lot deeper than that, and that's what I'm going to address based on a verse in this week's chapter where Moses himself addressed it. But when you read the verse itself, you may not fully appreciate it until you read the words of the Arizal, Holy Arizal, great mystic and Kabbalist, and after the Arizal, Baal Shem Tov, because both of them elaborate on this verse and explain it in a way as you'll see how relevant it is to our lives. And why is it so important is because, as we shall see, some of the most common things we do that we take for granted, that are so much part of our existence, they can either become traps and forces that limit our capacities, or they can become stepping stones and springboards for great growth. So usually you think in terms like, Okay, we have our lives, we have our boring, tedious, busy lives. And from time to time, we have our escapes in different forms and fashions where we find some deeper experience. An escape can be through vacation, through romance, through religion, through spirituality, through reading, through music. I mean, through art. There's thousands of ways that human beings find ways to so-called break out from from the monotony of the daily grind, the daily routines of our lives. Whereas those daily routines are acknowledged to be very tedious and if you only had that, all you did was eat and sleep and drink and shop and deal with the same thing every day, day and again, most of us would go crazy. So human beings need something to some relief, we call it. Now sometimes we access that relief in healthy ways and sometimes not such healthy ways. Whatever is available to us. Most trouble we get into is because we're looking for that relief. And we can't find, let's say, a healthy outlet, we'll find it in other ways. There's an expression, Mayim gnuvim yimtaku. The stolen waters are the sweetest, the forbidden fruit, because it creates a rush of excitement. There's a certain excitement, there's a certain thrill in doing something that's prohibited, something that is secretive. Now, per se, that's not necessarily a bad thing if it's a healthy situation. But often there are many things that we do that are unhealthy, but they do satisfy that thrill. So human beings find ways to break away, to escape, to free themselves from the trappings of life. But the fascinating thing, and this is what Moses in his brilliance in the last days of his life tells the Jewish people, and it's a message till this day, that you can find spirituality even in the most mundane, common things. So yes, there are times you may need a Yom Kippur once a year, or Shabbat once a week, or other so-called moments where you have some type of unique and different experience. But the truth is, if you want to maintain a truly exciting and passionate life, the key is to find passion in the most common things and the most ordinary things. And in many ways, that's one of the most powerful messages of Judaism. Yes, we all need times, as I said, to break away, to get out of it all, to transcend. But the fact is, in our simple, ordinary lives, in the things that you consider to be the most boring, tedious elements of your life, lies hidden, potent, enormous power and energy that is waiting to be released. And that's really the secret to true happiness and transcendence. Because the other approach, remember, always ultimately is predicated on some form of escape. You know, it's not, my home, no, my home is a boring place. If you want to know my excitement, it's somewhere else. We always look for transcendence, so to speak, outside of our regular schedules. The French and some other romantics argue that true romance is only possible outside of marriage. Because marriage by nature is just a tedious, routine thing. It's good for the family, perhaps, but it's not good for personal excitement and satisfying people's so-called most sensual needs. Because anything that's routine-like ends up becoming boring, ends up wearing you down. How could you find excitement in things you do that are common and that are so ordinary? And Judaism's response is that's looking with the naked eye and also with the selfish eye. But when you look deeper, as we shall see, within the ordinary lies the most extraordinary power. So yes, from time to time we need to ignite it with an experience from outside, so to speak, but the key to maintaining it and the key to really transforming your life is not just escaping outside of it, but coming back into the ordinary and seeing the extraordinary within the ordinary and the remarkable even in the simple. So things like how you eat a meal, how you drink, who would think that could be spiritual? You know, that's just something that we all do. Animals do it too. Everybody needs to eat and drink. And the same thing with other so-called menial or tedious activities. So here's what Moses says to the people, as I said, last days of his life. This is the statement. He's talking about their journey, of course. And then he speaks about that that during these 40 years, the Jews were fed with the bread from heaven, otherwise known as the man. Because they were in the wilderness, so they didn't have natural food. Nothing grew there. So right after they left Egypt, a little period afterwards, the man fell every morning. They would wake up and they'd find this dew that was edible, that nourished them throughout these years. And the Jews had this love-hate relationship with the man, as you see, because on one hand it did feed them, on the other hand it had all the tastes, and they had all kinds of complaints about it as well. No one's ever happy. If you earn your keep, that's too hard. If you get it from heaven, that's not good enough either. But that's not so. So here's what Moses says to the Jewish people. I'm just looking. Where's this? Oh, here we are. So I'm reading from the chapter Eikev. It's chapter 8, verse 3. A biblical reading for you tonight. I'm not an evangelist, just for the record. Let me just see the context here. Okay. You shall remember, I'm translating from the Hebrew. Moses says to them, you shall remember the way which God had led you for these 40 years in the wilderness. So you may have been afflicted, but it also proved to you that you can have deeper wisdom and faith to follow God's commandments. And then he continues and says this very cryptic verse. He says, "Vayan chaverecha," he afflicted you and caused you to become hungry, and then fed you with the man, with the bread from heaven, which you did not recognize, and neither did your parents recognize. It was a strange food. No one had ever seen it before. But this was for you to know, and here's the famous line that people know, that not by bread alone does a human being live, but by the word of God, or the spark of God that is within the food, does a human being live. So you've probably heard the expression, not on bread alone does a person live. So here's an interesting statement here. God made you hungry and afflicted you with hunger, and then fed you with some mysterious food from heaven, so that you know, that you learn, to teach you that not on bread alone does a person live, but on the divine power within that bread. If you think about it, it's actually a very contemporary type of statement. If you read this sounds very New Age. It's one of the few references in the Torah, in the Bible, where actually we talk about the divine energy. It's very, very direct. This is a direct translation. Now, so let's just analyze this a moment. Had they been fed regular bread, not bread from heaven, they could have deceived themselves into thinking that bread alone feeds them. So God created a new situation to show that's not the case. Here you're going through a wilderness, there's no bread to eat. The only bread you could have is something I'm giving you that is mysterious, food, that nourishes you. And to realize that all bread, that even when you come to the land of Israel and you will eat bread, regular natural bread, not bread from heaven but bread from earth, also know that it's not really bread that's feeding you, it's something from heaven. That's really what the message is. Because the answer to the question is a very simple question. God can do anything. Why do you have to send them bread from heaven? He's already making miracles. Why don't you just give them regular bread? Every morning they wake up and they find loaves of bread just like they were in a bakery. If you're already creating miracles. But God wanted them to see that the bread is not man-made. To teach them that even man-made bread is also not man-made. Now think about what this means. So here's what the Arizal says. And he asks a very powerful question. If the human being, according to the Torah, is the superior species, why should we be dependent on lower species for our nourishment? How is it possible even, he asked the question, that a soul, a divine soul, the Torah calls the human being one that's created in the divine image with a divine soul. So a divine soul is a powerful force. Why would a lowly piece of bread or any other food, vegetable, mineral, or other food, How could that nourish and give energy to a divine soul? Why doesn't the divine soul just have energy from its divine source? And the Arizal of Isaac Luria answers using this verse, because it's not the bread that's nourishing the soul, it's the sparks of the divine of God that are nourishing the soul. Yes, of course, if it was just a species, what would just a physical object have? What kind of power does it have to feed a soul? But within everything in existence, there are divine sparks and divine energy. And he goes on to explain that the greatest sparks fall and descend in the lowest places. So let me just explain this a bit, because this is, some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may be hearing it for the first time, so I need some elaboration. And I need a small introduction. When you look at the world around you, you look at this room around you right now, so we are completely trained to think and perceive experience with our sensory tools, which means 5 tools: our eyes, our ears, taste, touch, and smell. That's the way we interact and relate to the universe. You see something, your eyes tell you it's there. You hear something, your ears tell you you're hearing certain sounds. And same with taste, touch, and smell. And we are not just trained to think that way and experience that way, but we are actually, I would say, completely seduced by our senses. So when someone says to you that something exists that your eyes cannot see, right away the skeptic in you wakes up and says, 1 second, who knows, how do I know if it's there then? And just look at the power of suggestion, of advertising, and other messages that inundate us daily that stimulate our 5 senses. Look at the power they have to sell us things, to convince us of things, even things that are not good for us, because we are essentially slaves to our senses. And it takes effort, it takes wisdom and discipline to discover there's something more than what your senses experience. But never underestimate the power of your senses. They're very, very powerful. More powerful than we'll ever imagine. But an intelligent person knows that there are many, many areas in life, and I would submit that the most important areas in life are not contained by the senses. For instance, love. There is no human being on earth that does not need love, and yet love cannot be quantified and contained by the senses. You can experience love through your senses. You can kiss someone you love. You can hug someone you love. You can have a feeling, actually a physical sensation, miss someone you love. But love itself is not a sensory experience. It manifests in the senses, but it's not a sensory experience. It doesn't originate in the senses. Because if someone said, well, I don't see it, I don't smell it, I don't taste it, I don't touch it, I can't hear it, does it mean it's there? Absolutely. The love of a parent to a child, the love of an adult to an adult, whether it's romantic love or any type of love, is there even if it's not seen, heard, taste, touched, or smelled. It's there even if the two people are not in the same room. The love you have for people that you love, even if you're not seeing them, the love is there. How do you know it? You feel it. So there's a thing called a feeling. A feeling doesn't necessarily fit into the 5 senses. And the same thing is with our thoughts and ideas. We have many, many ideas and concepts, and they too are not necessarily contained or limited by the senses. Yes, you can speak what you think, but you don't have to. You can think about it in your mind and no one else will ever know. If you don't decide to communicate it or write it, it will not enter the world of the senses. So when we talk about the process of elimination and discovering, so to speak, what is reality, I'm going to go through all the steps, but basically we begin with the reality of what we see and hear and experience with the senses. Then we understand that there must be some things beyond that. Today, for instance, even scientifically, there are many, many forces, and the ones that are most dramatically impacting, shape who we are, that are absolutely invisible. No one will ever see subatomic particles. DNA are invisible. Even the cellular structure of a human body is invisible. But what's not invisible is its impact and its and its consequences and its effects. But we clearly have identified forces that are invisible, cannot be experienced with the senses, yet they are the most powerful forces that shape who we are. So it's critical that's why I wanted to give this introduction, to talk about bread and all the other things in our lives. The first thing we have to establish is that what you see is not what you get. And that there's another reality that a sensitive person can open themselves up to, which is called the energy level of reality. Einstein said matter and energy are reversible. Matter is energy, energy is matter. So when you see matter, what you're really looking at is a form of energy that has congealed and has solidified into matter. But it's not just matter. It's energy that took the shape of matter. And if you wish, that matter can be broken back into energy and you won't see it again. For instance, if you take a piece of wood that's clearly visible to the senses, the human senses, throw it into fire, it will disappear. You will not see it any longer. The only thing you'll see is the effect that the wood feeding the fire, giving off heat and warmth and light. And the child will ask you, so where did the wood go? You'll say, well, the wood has now been turned into energy, that you see it in the heat and the flame, but it doesn't look like a piece of wood anymore. So what happened to it? The answer is it went back to its essential core that is beyond the senses and is turned into energy. This today is common knowledge. It's not mysticism, what I just said. But this essentially is the heart of all mystical thinking, which even the word mysticism is a little deceiving. It's not mystical at all. It's just the reality beneath the surface. So for people who are trained to see it, they don't no longer think in terms of looking at the body language. They can see a human body, they see your reactions, and can tell you, in a sense, what your psyche is going through. And not because they're prophets. It's just the trained eye that can see the cause and not from the effect. All experts are that way. You talk to an expert about any given matter, you show them a symptom, they can immediately tell you this is a symptom of so-and-so. That doesn't mean they always know. Obviously, sometimes they can make mistakes. But a trained person who has experience can what you say a person with experience really is, an expert, so to speak, is someone that sees the forces that the novice cannot see. So if you go to an attorney, or you go to a doctor, or you go to any professional, what you're really going for is to get an observation of a person who essentially sees or knows what's going on beneath the surface due to their experience. Again, doesn't mean it's perfect. They can make mistakes. But the likelihood is they have a certain perspective because of their experience. So just like a doctor may touch and feel a person who has some pain, let's say in their arm, the doctor will touch, and then get to a point that you feel suddenly more pain. So it's clear, we all know that why you feel more pain, because that's the most tender area, because something's going on there. You don't need to be a doctor to know that. But a doctor who's trained can know from that, if it's here, it must be a tendon, it must be a ligament, it could be a muscle. And you take some tests and x-rays and so on, and you discover something that the naked eye cannot see. The same thing is psychologically. You speak to someone in a conversation, if you're trained, you touch certain areas, you suddenly see they pull back. And you know why they're so resistant, because that's the most tender area. And the less they want to speak about it, that's probably the most important thing they should be speaking about. Now obviously, you have to qualify it with the sensitivity and respect of someone's boundaries. And it's not the job of a professional to just assault somebody's psyche without their permission and also not hurt them in the process. I mean, on a physical level, yes, a doctor will be sensitive, but the pain is just physical pain. On an emotional level, if you go into an area that is extremely sensitive and tender and raw, you can hurt somebody. So it's critical, of course, that the person who's trained knows how to tread quite sensitively in that area. But there's no question that that's where you find, when you have a conversation with someone and you suddenly talk about things. I mean, it's happened, I can't tell you how many times. I mean, in a way, it's a blessing when you can identify that. You identify something by the area where people don't want to talk about. That's usually the area. So it's like, you know, that story where the Chelem guy, is looking for his keys in the dark. So a friend comes by and says, okay, let me help you look for the keys. Where'd you lose them? And he points to a few hundred yards away. So he says, so why are you looking here? He says, because here's where the light is shining, you know? So usually, and I can tell you from my own experience, people come, they tell you they have a problem. Relationship is not working. I'm having an issue with my mother, with my parent, with my fat children, my work, whatever it may be, and it seems to be a pattern. and you start exploring, you start talking about things, and then you take the conversation to a place where the person may not necessarily want you to go. And they say, why are you going there? That's not what I'm talking about, I'm talking about, and when you point out, you tell the story, you say, well, you want me to go where the light is, I'm trying to go where the keys were lost, Because people want to go, or not maliciously, they gravitate to the easier option. We all gravitate to the easiest option always. Why make our lives more miserable than necessary? The point I'm making here is not to be critical, it's we are blinded and subjective, which is exactly why you go to somebody else for advice. To hear, at some point I'll tell somebody, so why'd you come to me? To agree with you? They don't want to say that, of course, but sometimes that's what people want. They want to feel that you agree with them, okay, and they could say, okay, he agrees with me, so you see I'm right. I know it sounds childish, but that's the fact. A lot of people want that for whatever reason, affirmation or confirmation that they've done everything possible, so it must be a curse from heaven or something. But to go back to the theme here, the point is that energy is all about around us, and it's the trained eye and the person who has some experience that can recognize the spiritual energy that is everywhere. And the truth is that's really the goal of a person who's on the journey toward the inner. So just to use a simple example that I often use. You see a person crying, tears coming out of their eyes. So that everyone can tell you, if tears coming out of someone's eyes, they must be sad. Or maybe tears of joy, fine. But think now, let's take it one step further. Is it the tears that make you sad, or is it the sadness that makes you cry? Right, you got it. Obviously, the tears, the physical tears, are just a manifestation of something that doesn't have a physical manifestation. It's called an emotion, called feeling. Sadness. Sadness overwhelms you, and for some reason, that creates tears in your tear ducts, and at some point those tears come out of your eyes, and it's uncontrollable at times. Why does it work that way? There are interesting explanations in the Kabbalistic writings of what tears are about and why they're salty and stuff like that. But the point I want to make is there's a cause and effect, and the key is never to confuse the cause and effect and think that the cause is the effect and the effect is the cause. And the same thing is in all of nature. So this one verse is what Moses is saying, and what I've just explained is based on the Arizal. It's not just about bread. Everything is divine energy that's making it exist. So when it rains outside, the same thing. See, for most of us, rain, okay, something to talk about in the elevator, of course. There's something, looking at Weather Channel or you look at the weather report, and you can feel like you see all the meteorological forces and the pressure systems, and what always gets to me is they tell us how many miles per hour is the wind, even if you're not going sailing. It's important. Barometer. Most people don't even know what a barometer is, but they tell you the barometer is high or low. The point I'm making is that when it comes to weather, so let's say rain, so you got to wear a raincoat, an umbrella. Some people change their whole life schedules based on it, from head to toe, and in every possible way. It's going to rain, maybe it's going to rain, And meteorologists, of course, will tell you some of the causes, the scientific causes of how rain is formed and shaped. And this verse in the Torah will tell you that just like tears come out of your eyes, maybe rain is a form of cosmic tears, and maybe it's the angels crying. And just like tears, no one would associate with feelings, unless we know. Why not say that maybe tears coming from heaven is a sign that the world needs a little crying about? And from time to time it needs to express the sorrow of, call it existential loneliness. This is not trying to be cute. This truly is a mystical way of looking at it. And the same thing is with everything else. Just like anger. You see people burst out in anger, especially if it's called clinical but consistent. You know that the person has a lot of anger inside of them. And you really know when you tell them that you must be an angry person, then you really see how they react. That's a good sign usually. How angry they get when you tell them that. Not me. I'm not an angry person, There's always a reason why I get angry, because the other person did something. So why is it that some people get angry at situations that other people don't get angry at? That's another discussion. So anger is very similar to the eruption of a volcano or an earthquake, where pressures are being released, internal pressures. So we know today a volcano or an earthquake is not just in a vacuum. When the crust of the earth beneath the earth grinds and comes to a point where it needs to release pressure, that will cause an earthquake. So in that context, basically all of nature as we see it has forces beneath the surface that are shaping it, and there are forces, metaphysical forces beneath the scientific forces that are shaping that as well. And that's what Moses is saying. And when you look at it that way, then everything takes on a different shape. So had God given the Jews 40 years of bread from earth, they would never have this lesson. They would have deceived themselves into thinking, hey, it's nature. The Alter Rebbe, the Baal HaTanya, says a very interesting thing about nature. He says nature is a word used for anything we don't understand. So we call it, it's nature. Sun rises, it's nature. The Torah thought asked the question, why? Why is it that when you plant grain in the ground, that grain can then be cut and threshed and turned into flour, and when you mix that flour with water and you bake it, you have bread that sustains the human being? And the answer is given is because there's some force of energy, some form of inner energy inside that bread. And not on bread alone, not by bread alone does a human being live, but by the spark of the divine within it. What this means in very contemporary terms is wherever you go, whatever you do, today, tomorrow, has divine sparks waiting for you to release them. Each of us is allocated with a certain amount of, let's call it spiritual opportunities. So a businessman understands it very well. Wherever he goes, he looks for business opportunities. Nothing will miss his eye. Anything is another opportunity. Well, for a spiritual person, everything is a spiritual opportunity. Why did God lead me here? In some way to improve the situation. So wherever you travel, wherever you go, whatever you interact with there's a reason for it. And the question is, are you going to use it for selfish interests, or are you going to redeem the divine spark within it? So think of a life like that every mundane act we do, every meal, every breakfast, lunch, dinner, coffee, tea, is not just a nice social thing, or to feel because you're hungry and you need to eat. It's a spiritual experience. You have at that moment the ability to change the world. Not only on Yom Kippur in the highest point of the year, as I said, but in every specific detail of your life. If a person looks at their life that way, life takes on a whole different shape and form. And obviously it requires, as I said earlier, because we're so seduced and so overwhelmed by our senses, it requires us constantly being vigilant and looking for the deeper forces beneath the surface that are not obvious. Because it's so easy just to, you're hungry, you eat a meal, and you go on. So just to give you to depict the journey of food and your interaction with it, based on this verse, take an example. And there's the scientific analysis of the digestive process. I'll give you the spiritual analysis. Okay. Starting with a comment that says that when a human being, a wicked person treads on the ground, the cobblestones cry out, "What right do you have to walk on me? I've never transgressed God's will. What right do you have to walk on me?" And of course, when those stones are being tread upon by a righteous person, the stones argue and compete who will be the stone that the tzaddik, the righteous person, walks upon, because they want to be supportive of this righteous person. When Jacob went to sleep on the Temple Mount, the Bible says the stones that he put under his head had a battle. Each one wanted to be under the tzaddik's head. So God made a miracle that they all became one stone. So therefore there was no longer a battle. The question is asked, why didn't they battle? Which part of that one stone should be under his head, even if they became one? And the answer is, because when they're separate, they feel they're less, but once they're one, they feel they're part of the same experience. So even if one part of the stone is under his head, the other parts are also part of that same stone. That's the power of unity. unity, when you're truly united with others, you don't need to do everything because you feel you're part of another person's benefit is your benefit. It's when we feel divided where we compete because we feel if that person wins, I lose. As an aside, so what is the meaning behind this? So here's the process. If you're walking in a field and you come by, you see a juicy apple tree with these very luscious dripping, oozing apples waiting to be like speaking to you, eat me, right? Okay, and you pull the apple off the tree, one of the apples that looks very ripe and ready, and you take a good bite into it, and it's very refreshing, a good hot day. I mean, I'm using apple. If you don't like apples, just replace it with some other fruit that you like. I just don't want to lose anybody here. Because I once spoke about apples, and someone told me later they don't like apples. So I said, what do you like? Plums. So I said, you should have just replaced it with plums. I just want to qualify that right at the outset. Okay. Bananas, whatever they may be. So what's going on here? So on a very physical level, besides the fact that it's a refreshing in a hot day, or just are you eating an apple, by the way? Oh. Okay. You want to zoom the camera in so we could have like a real-time description? You mind? Like taking a bite, very slow motion? Huh? I'm just kidding. It's a nectarine. Okay. A nectarine isn't some type of crossbreed between a peach and something or other? And a plum, is that what it is? Okay, hybrids. Fine. So, on a very physical level, the apple does different things for a person. And of course, it also has a refreshing element and it has a nutrient element. Apple breaks down. Once it enters your gullet, and then goes the digestive process, some way that apple will make it into your bloodstream. Your body will eliminate anything of waste. And that apple has become part of who you are now. And it will give you a certain amount of energy for a certain period of time. Now, most of us don't really think about that, because once you finish the apple, how many people think about what happened, after the meal? Unless, God forbid, it leaves you with indigestion or something. But if it doesn't, you just move on to the next meal. I think I recall writing a few years ago an article called "The Power of 8 Seconds." I estimated that it takes around 8 seconds for the time that food enters your mouth and turns into whatever you want to call it, where it basically equalizes all food, becomes the same. And for these 8 seconds, we have this, $1 trillion industry. Basically, all food industry is based on these 8 seconds. That you're going to put a piece of food in your mouth, what kind of taste, or how you dream about it. Just to show you how few seconds in your life become such a powerful force. The taste of something. When in truth, as I said, after those 8 seconds, it enters a state where you don't even want to look at it. Once it enters where it has to end, and which is fine. So it's just interesting how we are, enamored by the externals of things. I'm not trying to take away good tasting foods, and we all have taste. I have my own taste. But it's just interesting to step back sometimes and just think of who we are in that context and what we'll do for it and how far we'll travel to get that unique taste. So, and I understand a case can be made that the sensory, savory flavors of something reflects deeper sensual experiences. So even though it's 8 seconds, but a lot of special things can happen in 8 seconds. I understand that part. So but that of course also is exploring the deeper elements. It's not just the pure taste of it. So in this journey, what does the Torah say in this week's chapter? That before you eat something, make a blessing. It talks about v'chalta v'savata, v'rachta Hashem Elokecha. When you shall eat and be satisfied, and then you shall bless God. So that talks about the blessing after the meal. There's a blessing before the meal. And we take blessings sometimes also for granted. Most people see a blessing as saying thank you. It's a menschliche thing to do. It's the right thing to do. God blessed us with life. God blessed us with food. So you say, thank you for giving me this sustenance. There's no question that on that basic level, it's a very, very virtuous thing. And the Talmud actually says, for a person who doesn't make a blessing on food, it's like a person who's like stealing, in a way, from God. Like someone taking something from another without saying thank you. God's not asking for you to pay. The thank you is the payment. It's an acknowledgement. But the Arizal, as I'm explaining, has a much deeper explanation than just thank you. There's actually a very powerful experience taking place here. And I'm just using the apple as a symbolic element that can be true for any interaction, as you'll soon see how that plays itself out in our human interactions. But what's really happening is like this. The apple has been on this tree for a period of time. And obviously it was once a seed. And before it was a seed, it was a tree probably before this apple tree. One tree creates other trees. But this apple was lying in this place, and had you not walked through the field, that apple may never have been consumed by you. It would have lived its life through its lifespan, then fallen off the tree, rotted, and become part of the nutrients that would have been consumed by earth, and perhaps also turned earth into maybe another apple tree, or whatever happens when things decompose and they become part of the soil and so on. And here's how it goes. So being that there's divine spark inside this food, as I said, not on bread alone, not on a fruit alone, not on an apple alone, this divine spark is also waiting in the apple for something to happen. Now, nothing could happen, and here's the two options that can happen. A person can consume the food because they're very hungry and they're indulging themselves. No blessing made. No recognition that this food is put there for a deeper reason. And that's when that food turns into your energy. And let's say that person, just to give an extreme situation, takes that energy and goes ahead and hurts somebody, insults somebody. So the energy of this apple cries out in its own way. You're not going to hear the words, but in its own metaphysical way, cries out, what right did you have to take me away from my peaceful existence on this tree? And I could have been part of nature and just continued the process as apples before me have, and make me part of you, and I've become now an unwilling partner in your hurting another person. Because the energy that I've become is now being used by you for something destructive. On the other hand, if the person who eats the apple does release the spark by acknowledging it through the blessing, and by using the energy that the apple gave this person for doing a mitzvah, a good deed, then the apple is not just neutral, the apple thanks the person, because the apple says, the energy in the apple says, had you not eaten me, I would have remained here. And yes, I would have been part of the clockwork of nature, but I would never have been elevated to helping another human being. I would never have been part of and participating in changing the world for the better. And I thank you for taking me and elevating me in that way. So in an interesting way, and our relationship with just this simple act of eating an apple is a very, very fundamental perspective, because obviously I'm talking about it on a microcosm. But think of it now on the macrocosmic level. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, his name was Rav Yosef Yitzchak. He was a young child. He took a walk with his father. His name was Rab Shalom Ber. And they were walking in a meadow. And during their walk, like any child will do, or any one of us will do as adults even, he tore off a leaf from the tree, the young child. And he began rubbing it. And his father reprimanded him and said, what right did you have to take that leaf off the tree that was lying there and part of God's plan and just rub it like that for no purpose? And this little boy later writes in his diary, in his memoirs, about what kind of impact that little story had on him. A young child hearing that from his father. The sensitivity that you have to have and consciousness to everything. Now you could imagine if he's sensitive to a leaf, how sensitive he would be to another human being. So this isn't just a matter of some obsession about apples or nectarines or leaves. It's an attitude on life that wherever you go, it's not there for your taking. It's not about indulgence. It's not about you. You are given the blessing. I'm blessed to be on this earth, given life. Your contract is renewed every day. Your soul, just like the bread has a spark, you also have a spark. It's called your soul. And it was refreshed this morning and given to you. And that's not an accident. It means that God trusts you for another day in this world, and hopefully for many, many days and healthy years, to fulfill his mission, to fulfill a calling. What's the calling? That whatever you meet in this world also was blessed to meet you, and that you should appreciate with humility this blessing, and not just think that you're the center of the universe and everything is there for your taking. It's all there like a stage that's set, your life, for you to elevate, for you to use the opportunities, the interactions, the people, and the leaves and apples, and whatever it may be, to redeem, elevate, refine these sparks. And should you not, even if you don't use it for destructive purposes, in a sense, you've left things to die. Because when a moment is not utilized to the fullest, or an opportunity is not utilized to the fullest, that opportunity is no longer, in a sense, it has died. It's a dead opportunity. It's like a spark that remains trapped, and you passed by and forgot to redeem it. The Baal Shem Tov tells it in a beautiful, not tells it, but there's a beautiful story with the Baal Shem Tov and his students. It's a long story. One of the great students of the Baal Shem Tov was a great, great scholar and sage. His name was Reb Chaim Rappaport. And he sent him on a mission, but to make the long story short, the bottom line in the mission was, when he came back, and he shared with the Baal Shem Tov where he stayed overnight, and when he woke up in the morning, there was a fountain of water, a brook of water, near the place where he was staying, and that he took a drop of that water and made a blessing and drank the water. And when the Baal Shem Tov heard that, he said, be aware and know that water was waiting for you to come there from the beginning of time and make that blessing. So imagine if you think of life that way, that every step you take, every way you tread, every experience and interaction you will have has been waiting for you to be there, to come to do something that only you could do. And of course the sadness if you don't do it. So you may not never know, but you may have lost. Imagine a child being hiding in a place. You were supposed to pass by and free that child, and you leave, and the child remains locked there. That's what spiritual opportunity is about. Now, this isn't meant to put a heavy load on us and guilt and so on. On the contrary, it's meant to teach us the gift of life, the gift of opportunities. Now, is it possible for a person to be so cognizant and self-aware and spiritually sensitive every moment, everything we do? Obviously, it takes a lot of discipline to be at a place where you're completely not indulging in your own needs. But just to be aware of what I'm saying, and even think about it once a day or a few times a day, can change your life. Because just think of it this way. People say, I'm looking for new opportunities, a new change in my life. Maybe God sent you something today that you decided to ignore. And that may have been the answer to all your prayers. People say, my prayers are not being answered. Maybe it was answered. And you decided that you were busy, too busy. Or you decided that person you met was not important enough. How do you know? In other words, you get so consumed with how you think it through, maybe there's a bigger plan. Well, not just maybe, there is. I always tell the story because it just captures it, for me personally, in a very almost simplistic way. It was around 6-7 years ago. I was going for a Shabbos. It was in the summer, the end of the summer, East Hampton. It was a Shabbaton. I was speaking there for the weekend. So I was driving on the LIE. Then I finally got off the LIE. What is it, the 27? I remember the roads there. But anyway, I stopped for gasoline. I went to look for the sparks in the gas station inside the gasoline into my automobile. And the gas station was right near a club, which I saw already was going to be a rocking night that night. And one of the attendants who was parking cars came over to me, and he asked me, he said to me, are you here for the party? Yeah, I'll park your car. So I said, not exactly. I'm just passing through. And I didn't even really think of the Baal Shem Tov's lines in this thing. Maybe I'm not just passing through. Maybe there is a reason for me. But it was not to be at the party because I had to be in East Hampton. At least my plans were that way. No, the end of the story is not that I ended up in the club. That's not what I'm going to say. And now that I think about it, maybe there was something there for me. But, you got to do this with measure as well. Anyway. But here's what happened. So we start talking, myself and this guy, and, an interesting conversation. And I see he's very intrigued with me. I don't know for what reason exactly. I said he looked to me like, not that I was in any way dismissive of him, but he looked to me like a person who was, I don't know, what they call him, is redneck a condescending term? Okay, so not that. What would be like, how would you say it not in a condescending way? Southern, okay. I wonder if the Southerners would think, are there no Northern redneckers?
Yeah, there are.
What are they called? Okay, it doesn't matter. Blue necks. Anyway, the point was I wasn't really dismissive. It was just, I didn't think, anyway, he asked me, what do I do? So I told him I write, I teach. I tried to explain to him a bit. And then he heard that I send out a weekly email. So he said to me, why don't you take my email address, you send me what you write. So I did. By all means, no question. Anyway, and the story ended there. I went to East Hampton, came back after Shabbos. It's not like I forgot it, but it was what it was. I put him on the list, and he started getting the emails. Around, this was 7 years ago, around 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I get an email from him. 5 years later, seemingly almost like an incidental event that's very uneventful. And he writes to me the following. He writes to me, you may not remember me, but I was the fellow that was parking the cars. When you came by, you got gas. And you've been sending me the emails. And I have to tell you that I'm Jewish. And I've never gone to any Jewish schools. Never been to any services. I have no synagogue. I don't go even Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. But your emails have become my Judaism. And I saw that he was serious because he started outlining. He says, here's the email I prayed Yom Kippur with, and here's the email I prayed on Shabbos with. And he was quoting me ideas and lines. And he says, so our meeting was not an accident, as you write in this email. And he gives me this whole perspective on life that I saw he really had read it well, and it was not just read, he was worshiping it in a way, worshiping with it. It became his prayers. He writes all this. And I was blown away. Not by him per se, that's beautiful to hear, but I was blown away by just that interaction. Had I not given him an email, this would never have happened. And I realized how technology itself has divine sparks. We all use it. Everybody's texting and all the gadgets everybody's got. Actually, I must commend you in this class here. Usually, I don't see people checking their texting. I don't know why, but that's how it is. And we use it for anything, for frivolous things, for games, for Narishkeiten. What is that? How do you say Narishkeiten? Stupidity. Or for business, or even the good things. But it was so interesting to me. And it was actually he that initiated. So after that, wherever I go, whether people ask me or not, I always say, by the way, you have an email address? Yeah. And I said, maybe you want to get what they think I want to sell them something. I said, no, it's free. I'm not selling you anything. It's an interesting thought. You don't want it. You could always you can unsubscribe, whatever. And I can't tell you how many people, as a result, I just see it as like an opportunity. It's just a small example. Someone asked me the other day, I was teaching a class somewhere else, and they said to me, I was on a plane. Because they heard I spoke about a similar theme. What could I do? I said, you're sitting there somewhere on a plane. You could be nice and kind and all that, but you could also get their email address and send them something. You have your own thing. I could send something from me. It doesn't really matter who. But it's a way of recreating a connection. And it's interesting, these technologies didn't exist a while ago. It would have been intrusion. You couldn't just go write a letter to somebody you met nowhere. Email has that type of possibility, obviously with someone's permission, not spam or anything like that. But It's just an example of how opportunities are there all the time. And this just was one story of many, but this one, I never forgot this story. And I've invited him here, but he's never really come. That's what his thing is. He gets the emails, that's his comfort zone, I guess, which I'm beyond delighted. And anything I can do to help him, I've offered it, of course. And it's just interesting. He writes to me once in a while. I get a comment from him here and there. But I know how valuable it is to him. To me, that alone is worth all the work in the writing. And that story, just an example. We talk about sparks. So there's sparks everywhere. And it's not just what you do for someone else. Because, you could think of it this way, that I'm like doing it for him. I'm writing and he's inspiring him. It's not that way. It goes both ways. What it does for you can be even more than what it does for the other. Because, as I said with the apple, the energy goes both ways. You're doing something for the apple, is doing something for you. And it's a partnership. And I think this is an attitude, all from one verse. And if you think about it, I'm not forcing it into the verse. It's what it says. It says, not by bread alone does a person live, but by the divine spark within it. It's a lesson in life. And obviously it doesn't just mean bread. It means everything. And God, in a way, strange way, said, I afflicted them and made them hunger, which you think is like a negative thing, all to teach them that food is that not by bread and not by material success and not by material gain do you live, but you live by the sparks that are within it. But let me take it one step further, which really drives the point home, and this is what the Baal Shem Tov adds to the equation, which I always find really eloquent and really poetic even. He says, the reason some of us desire certain foods, even foods, or desire other things in life, and others don't desire those things, is because it's your soul that's desiring the sparks that are connected to you in that thing. You think it's just your taste, born taste, acquired taste, habit, whatever, your parents. Some people hate foods that their parents forced them to eat. Some people love foods that their parents didn't want them to eat. We can have all kinds of psychological analysis of our tastes. But the Baal Shem Tov adds, and he uses a verse, he says, Re'evim gam tzmeim, nafshem bahem titatev. It's a verse from the book of Psalms. It says, let me translate it, Re'evim gam tzmeim, hungry and also thirsty, as a result of the fact that their soul is wrapped within the spark. Well, this is how he interprets it, within the sparks of those foods. So you think you're hungry and thirsty because your body is craving to eat. You're hungry, you haven't eaten in a while. You're thirsty, you like this food, you like that food, you like this drink, that drink. In truth, it's your soul craving the sparks. Think about it that way. It's a fascinating way to look at life. That means there's a script being played out that we don't always see. And this is not just about food, obviously. It's our tastes, our attitudes, things we like, the people we like, what we gravitate to. Now, of course, you could always argue, well, listen, there are a lot of things I like that are not that healthy. Even that, by the way, maybe the unhealthy part should be what you shouldn't be going after, but there's something in that experience that you crave for that probably has some holiness. You have to learn to distinguish between the spark and where the spark is trapped. So I'm not trying to justify and say everything a person desires or craves, it means it's good for you. You can crave something that's not good for you. But that doesn't mean there isn't something there, and you have to perhaps find it in a different way. So it gets a little more complicated. But the concept is one that the way we're wired is very much part of what the mission in our lives is about. So God leads the footsteps of a human being. Why some of us were born in certain countries. Why some of us even like to travel to certain countries. Why some of us like certain cultures, foods, cuisines, other tastes on many, many levels is because, spiritually speaking, there's something that we are connected with there. There's something that is waiting for you to redeem. As in that story I mentioned before, that the water is waiting for that person to elevate it. And there's actually an expression that the lower waters cry and wait, when will they be redeemed? So think of it this way, if you want to be sentimental about it. How many objects, how many cities have you left crying because you have not freed the sparks that were waiting for you when you came there? You left in your wake many, many unrealized opportunities. And I don't say this because out of the guilt. On the contrary, it's a way to think next time you enter a place. We travel in the summer or go other places and different experiences. Sometimes just sitting in a cab or commuting, or like I took that drive there and I went to a gas station, etc., etc. So again, this doesn't mean we can suddenly, I want to just qualify. My intention here is not that, I remember saying something about divine providence, and someone started calling me every day that he started reading in the front page of the New York Times, everything for him was divine sparks. He took it a little too seriously. Don't get me wrong, I thought he should take it seriously, but I meant to say he took it too literally. That's really the word I wanted to use. And you have to take it with a measure. The idea is there. It's an attitude. And it's an attitude that can really change your life. I have to say, I grew up in an environment, my own home, environment around different influences I've had that trained me from young age to think this way. I remember when my sister got married, two sisters. It was my older sister, and actually it was my second sister. What was it? 1979. No, it was my second sister because I wasn't giving the class. But it was approximately in the mid-'80s, and I invited some people from the class here to come to the wedding. I didn't think it through, to be honest. What I mean by that is I didn't have it all planned out. So they thought, the usual protocol means someone invited you. They probably invited you to the chuppah or something, and maybe to the reception, but not to stay for the dinner. After the chuppah, I see they're about to leave. Maybe 15, 20 people. And I said, what are you talking about? You come to the dinner. You're here for the wedding. I remember my invitation was for the whole thing. I wasn't thinking, they became mortified. They said, what do you mean? There's no place cards or a table, which is a big thing I discovered later in my life. It could be life and death, actually. What table you sit at, and the people that don't talk to each other for the rest of their lifetimes if they put at the wrong table. Don't you know that I don't speak to that person that you sat me near? So I invited them, and there was no there were no place cards, and there was a caterer, and there was a plan and all that. So I told the caterer, listen to me, there's room right over there, you bring another table, set it up, make sure that blah, blah. They didn't even notice. By the time they came there, the table was all set, ready for them. So no place cards. I sat them all down, they had another table. And they were so amazed at something that I took completely for granted. I'm not saying to toot my horn, I'm saying I just was very struck by it. So afterwards, they said, one of them told me, I never saw anything like that. Come to a wedding, you have planned settings and meals, and who didn't get fed because I ate. I said, look, I didn't ask you to eat. I just told you to come. It's a joke. I didn't say that, of course. They were fed well. But then I realized where they're coming from, which is a normal thing. I wasn't paying for the wedding. My parents were, and it wasn't about the money. Actually, it was about whether there was enough chicken or whatever they were serving. I don't even remember. But then I remember when one of them told me this, I said, you have to understand where I come from. I'll tell you where I grew up. When I was a little kid, I remember it vividly, and it was, we had a table, Shabbos, holidays. We had guests very often, a lot of guests. And it's not like my parents were ultra wealthy or anything. It wasn't even an issue. It wasn't even discussed. And I remember as a kid, maybe I was 6 years old, living in my house, and it was sukkahs. So sukkahs, is a small little shack you have near your house. And I was home, my mother, and my mother looks out the window. She sees my father's marching with 20 guests. I remember as a child, but I remember my mother didn't say oy vey or what, She, but I saw that she was not ready for it. It means it was not planned. Now, what my father was thinking is another story. But that's what he did. So they're marching. So I remember nonchalantly, my mother, without any issues, no airs, nothing, she said to me, she called me Simenke, she said, go. She told me to go out through the back door, go to the neighbor, and bring in a few challahs. Ask them for an extra little challahs. So I went, I brought a bunch of challahs. My mother fixed it up with a fish. She goes, she figured it out. And it was to me, as a 6-year-old, you see these things remain. It became a given. It was not even a big thing. It wasn't like a whole dramatic event. No one even knew. Now, I don't know what my mother told my father later, and maybe nothing. I don't know. My mother was that type. She was very gracious. It wasn't because also she grew up that way. It wasn't like a big thing for her. And I realized, and I told this story to these guys that were at the wedding from the class here, and they were like really, it was like such a culture change, a different attitude. And again, I'm not saying this is just what I grew up with. So I grew up in an environment where this was like a natural thing, that something comes your way, that's a blessing. You know, you don't start bitching about it, so to speak, and start becoming, or, you know, it didn't work out according to your plan. You adjust, you chill out, and you figure it out. Now, what would my mother do if she didn't have exactly the amount of fish? You figure it out. You make a platter, you know, like musical chairs. Whoever gets the first fish, that's it. I don't know. You figure something out. And it just, I mean, it's an attitude that is not necessarily tzaddikim. It's about a certain giving attitude, that your life is about, not about you. It's not about me. And if something doesn't work exactly according to your plan, everything's upset, and you get angry, and you pout, and say, you know, and even if you don't pout, you pout later. And becomes a whole type of issue. A life like this is usually, with an attitude like this, you generally are less depressed and less angry and less bitter. As I think I said, and I was someone wrote me the line, but I thought it was very accurate. Generally, people who are in a gracious mood and a giving mood are not very depressed when you're in that state of mind. You know, when you're not, it's very prone to being very lonely, depressed, and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying it's something that each of us can easily just change, because this has to do sometimes with conditioning and wiring and what you saw in your life, but at least to pause and think about it. If what I said is relevant, if you all grew up like an environment I did, by all means, then share it with friends that may have this issue. I guess all of us, even myself, we could always be better in this regard, but it's about understanding that we were sent here to this earth. It's a blessing, it's a gift, and you're here to give. And you're here to also receive, but it's a mutual experience. Just like I mentioned the apple. It's understanding that everything does not live by bread alone. There's a divine force in the food, in the interactions, in our experiences, whatever we do. And it's there for you to help redeem, and in return it redeems you. And with that type of attitude, it's like, it's what health is all about. You know, what is health? You say a healthy body. There's a flow. The heart is expanding or contracting. It's sending out blood and it receives blood and it flows. It's a circulation thing. God forbid a blockage is when there's either giving and not receiving, or receiving and not giving. Everything's like that. Breathing. You breathe in, you breathe out. You're taking and you're giving. You're expelling and you're absorbing. All of life is based on this cycle. And if you think it psychologically, do we psychologically breathe? Or are we taking more than we're giving? If you're taking more than you're giving, it's like someone who's breathing in and forgets to breathe out. Or it's someone whose blood is entering the heart and forgets to pump it out. Life is about that type of breathing. And when a person has that give and take, it's called mashpia makabel, give-take, they are generally going to be more healthier psychologically, more balanced, less angry. Because anger really, like other feelings that are very debilitating, is about getting tied up inside of you. You know, it's in, and you can't release. And release, taking in, releasing, is all part of this cycle. So to change things overnight is not easy, but if you think about it in that context, you know, just think of your life and see yourself. That's the first step. Awareness. Where do you stand? And then when you start becoming aware, you start saying, you know, something's a little off, out of kilter here. There's a little too much. Remember, the other extreme is also possible. There are people giving, and they forget about themselves. That's equally nuts. It's like someone breathing out, and forgetting to breathe in. It's all about a rhythm. Rotzei v'shuv, tension and resolution, yearning and returning. There's so many ways to express it. And what Moses is saying here, Moshe is saying in this one verse, he's talking about an attitude. He said, for 40 years, God wanted to implant this into you. He wanted to teach you that it's not bread alone. There's something deeper going on. So when you get hungry next time, you get thirsty, for food or for anything in your life, there's something deeper going on. You're thirsty and hungry for a relationship, means that maybe you have a big void inside of you. Maybe something hasn't been fed for a long time. Don't just indulge and just find instant gratification to resolve your immediate need. Maybe figure out what is going on. Why do you have such a deficiency? Why do you feel deprived? And again, this has to be done with moderation, because it's not like something we can just completely change overnight and immediately. It takes time to reframe our lives. But it's a great beginning this week because we have this verse, we have Moses' strength, he's teaching us this message. And it's a message he said so many years ago, but I find that it's relevant today more than ever. We live in a highly materialistic world, a very prosperous world, with a recession and all. Compare it to our grandparents and great-grandparents, this is a life of freedom. It's a life of luxury, relatively speaking. Our great-grandparents were running for their lives, let alone not had retirement accounts or complaining about losses in the markets and so on. They were basically trying to survive. I'm not suggesting to turn the clock back, but it puts things in context. We live in a world that has a lot of comfort. It's a lot of comfort zone, a lot of complacency as a result. And in turn, what happens is it creates a certain self-indulgent attitude. It creates a certain sense of entitlement. You know, we're entitled. And all that, what it does, it stops breathing. It causes you to stop breathing. You get sense of entitlement. It's about, what am I going to acquire? What am I going to acquire? What am I going to hold on to? How much am I going to hoard? How much am I going to accumulate? And there's a lack of that balance. You know, King David, years ago as well, said, turn to God. And he asked a big question. He said to God, it says in the prophecy, you said, God, Li ha-kesef li hazov omer nu'um Hashem. I, God, have all the gold and all the silver in the world. So King David asked the big question, so why don't you distribute it equally to everybody? Why do you give some more and others less? Why do you bless some more and others less? Why do you create that type of imbalance and not distribute equally, which would create so much more harmony in our lives? And God responds also with a verse. He says, "Because chesed ve'emes ma'yid sharua." Who then would do chesed? Who then would be giving in this world? If everybody had equally and there was no one with more than another, there would be no giving. Everyone would just be self-contained. And obviously he was talking financially, but also talking about everything. Each of us has something, a gift that another person does not have. That's the way it is. God did not create clones, so each of us has something to contribute that no person that ever lived or ever will live can contribute but you. Think about that one. And are you living up to it? Do you even know what it is? And that means, Ezu chacham halemid mikol adam. Who's the wise person? A person that learns from everybody. It means everybody has something to teach and everybody has something to learn. In one sentence, the Mishnah in the Ethics of the Father says it. Who is the wise person? The person who learns something from everyone else. That means every person has something to learn, and even if you're wise, there's something for you to learn from those people. And no one's exempt. In Jewish law, interestingly, even the mitzvah of charity, tzedakah, is also one, no one's exempt from that mitzvah, even a pauper. Everything relative. Because there's no such thing that you don't have the power to give. Question of what you give, how much you give. But to give, everybody has that power. Number one, it is empowering to know that. And number two, it's actually the way the balance of life works. There's a give and take. And the health of a human being, I reiterate what I said earlier at length, the psychological health of a human being, guaranteed, money back guarantee, is all direct. The formula for your psychological health is the balance of your giving and your taking. When it's imbalanced, rest assured there's going to be some psychological consequences. So it's a good place to begin, just to see where that balance, just like breathing. If somebody's breathing in out of proportion to how much they breathe out, you know there's some problem going on. There's some blockage, there's some impediment. Same thing with our heart beating, same thing with all our circulation. You know, I know people, for instance, growing up in homes, very dysfunctional homes, where they were deprived of love, and they were invalidated and hurt psychologically, deep ways, deep scars and deep wounds. And then when they begin the process of healing and grow, often what happens is they go to the other extreme. They become extremely self-absorbed. And the justification is, you know, for years I was no self, now I want to be a complete self. And there's a certain truth to that. It's like if for years you've been in a certain atrophy, God forbid, you need to work up those muscles. And that's why sometimes a person has to balance it. But Sometimes it goes the other extreme, and then you become equally problematic as it was when you were just, when you were not getting anything in your life. You become someone that's not giving anything in your life, and then you become part of the problem too. And it's critical. I mean, this is case by case. There's no real rule. There's no generic approach. It's critical to find balance. Maimonides says it this way. He says, always choose the middle path. But times when you wander off to the right too much, the only way to get back to the middle is to go to the left. Because let's say you wander off, you can't just keep going straight. You won't. To get back, you got to go left. I don't know if that fits the political attitudes. How do you... But whenever I speak for extremists, I always thank them. I say, because without extremists, to the right and to the left, we wouldn't know where the center is. So it's good to know where the edges of the roads are, so you just know where not to go. You go right in the middle. Not too much here, not too much there. So everyone is a give and take. Everyone has something to... There's nobody that doesn't have something to teach. So this, of course, has to be analyzed and assessed case by case because none of us are alike. But what your goal is not to be a pure giver or not a pure taker. It's a combination. Obviously, it's not taking, but it's about give and take in the sense of, like Hillel said it best, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? I mean, it's been repeated so many times. But finding that balance is far from simple. Because often, once we've been wounded, or once we've so-called swerved from the middle path, it's hard to find your bearings. And that's why it takes this type of energy. So to go back, to sum up, we have this unbelievable, remarkable statement from Moses, so many years ago, but so relevant, especially today. Because it's not just bread. It's your technology, it's your computers, it's your gadgets, it's everything. It's everything that comes your way. Not by bread alone does a human being live. There's a deeper spirit, there's a deeper script playing itself out in your life. And just thinking of your life that way, when you leave here this evening, you walk outside, just think about that. You're walking down the street, think about what other story may be going on here that you're not so aware of. And think about it tomorrow at some point. You'll see, it'll change things. Obviously, as I said earlier, it's hard to hold on to that, but if you hold on to that at least once a day, you'll start thinking a lot differently about your life. Because it's almost like looking at your life in many dimensions. There's what you see on the outer, and then you say to yourself, okay, what else is going on here that I can't not really see? And as soon as you do that, you right away open yourself up to it, because some things emerge, you say things differently, you're more open to, you're more flexible, you're open to spontaneous things happening. And as I said, I gave some examples. There's so many to be given. And I'd love to hear what the results are from this attitude, if you give me some feedback. So our job here is, I'm saying I'm giving you my piece on this, but my greatest blessing is to know that you carry it forward. It's not my words. It's straight from Moses, Arizal, Baal Shem Tov, everything we've been discussing, that you have sparks waiting for you to redeem. And only you can do them, not me, not anyone else. It's going to come your way. And you're the person that's going to have to do something about it. So start collecting. Start gathering them. Start redeeming them. And I say that, I think it's a great gift. And when you redeem them, spark redeemed becomes yours. And it will give you as much as you give it, if not more. So I like that line in the Frisco Kid, when the guy robs the train and he's about to jump off. And he's stolen everybody's jewelry and belongings and money and everything. And he says, remember the lesson in life, it's always better to give than to take. I don't know, should I conclude with that happy note? So with that being said, let's all learn to breathe a little better, psychologically, spiritually, and recognize that there are bottled up sparks waiting to be released, and it's up to you to release them, and you have the power to do so. And with that being said, I like to believe that's the mission of my own life, Meaningful Life Center, everybody we touch, and that's, I think it's somewhat contagious when just like confusion breeds confusion, clarity breeds clarity. Just like being tied up and bottled up breeds more bottling up. When you free things, it breeds that as well. So if we all do a little of that to each other, it helps all of us and hopefully can carry on like a ripple effect wherever we go. And as I said, please see me as one link in the chain. We're all links in different directions. And anything I can do to help anybody here, please see me as a friend, Same with Velvel or our entire team, and actually everybody here. And let me make some technical announcements as a result of that. Firstly, the class is dedicated in memory of Iris Clone's mother, Razel. Is she here, Iris? No. And also, happy birthday, to our good friend Mark Belinsky. Okay. Many good years. And also to Gary Salvat on his birthday, which I know is Tisha B'Av. Mark's was July 27th. What's your Hebrew birthday? 21st of Tammuz. Okay. It's a little past, but we're the birth of your animal soul. You have an animal soul? Okay. And the Gary Salvat, which I know is on Tisha B'Av, right? Okay. That's right. Yes, right. You know Gary. Yes. Special birthday. And if anybody would like to sponsor a class in honor of a birthday or honor of a loved one in any way, it's a great opportunity. It's also a give and take, so everybody benefits. And tomorrow night, Philip will be giving his 7 o'clock class. I will be concluding Sunday evening, 8 o'clock. We'll be only online, our fourth and final part of the 8 Secrets, Baal Shem Tov webinar. And there's a bunch of stuff that we've done in the last few weeks that is available online, and more to come. And we're always on a journey, so you'll hear about everything by email or other ways that we communicate. So if you haven't left your email address, please leave it. We'll also send you the weekly announcements about the classes. And what can I say? Share, pass on, and never know who you're going to meet in parking lots or anywhere else, as I mentioned before. So get their email addresses and send them something nice. I want to just say one more thing. One more mention. August 24th, Tuesday evening, which will be the 5th memorial lecture for my father. So I personally invite you all. The speaker will be Ambassador to the UN, Israeli Ambassador Gabriela Shalev. It will be on August 24th at 6:45 at the Park East Synagogue. That's on 67th Street between Lexington and Park, something like that. We sent that email. So I invite you all. It's a free lecture, and please, you can honor me in that way. It's honoring my father. So I really welcome and invite you all. We're also releasing a journal for that. If anybody wants to, again, this is a personal favor, wants to take out a little announcement that's a greeting that helps us support my work I'm doing in honor of my father, please see me as well, and I'll send you more information, and that's on a personal note. So that's August 24th, so mark your calendar. And what else is there? Did I miss anything else? I'm sure I missed something. But there's always next week, so we'll fill it. Good night. It was a pleasure, honor to speak to you beautiful souls.